working from home too long. Yeah, yeah. We have a routine like the effects.
Everybody hanging out? Everyone with them straight, right?
Yeah.
I think we should start on time today. Especially since we gave everyone an extra 30 minutes.
Leave like with us. Leave a bell announcement.
Like, use the speaker to make sure. Put the speakers out to that room. Put the TV out there. Got someone doing it for us. I dare say though.
I'm complaining about the shorts. They were complaining about the shorts.
It's like once I'm good up to it's a process, but I made it. It's always the side question of how it's
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me loud and clear? Because I'm not sure if this is working or not though. Yeah, sweet. Thank you so much for coming in, everyone, to the March edition of this AWS and user group. So we've got a very exciting lineup of speakers for you, featuring Plerion and PolarSeven. And quick shout out to Daniel, who's the Chief Information Officer for Plerion, for coming, presenting with us in this meetup. And not being biased or something like that, but I'm very, very proud to announce that PolarSeven has returned for a presentation. So we are the ones who organize this meetup, and we are going to, so as a consulting partner, we are very excited to impart our knowledge to you guys. And with that being said, let's quickly jump into the agenda for today. So, kicking off, Daniel, he's going to be taking us through Conditional Love for AWS Metadata Enumeration, followed by Jackson. So Jackson is going to be introducing us to some basics of Control Tower, why businesses should be using that, along with Florian, who's going to be diving into the technical side of things and showing you a short demo of how stuff works. And yes, obviously, we will be starting our networking session at 7, which is the hard stop. And just a request on that one though, we understand that you guys love our pizzas, but I would really appreciate if each one of you stick to 2 slices so that everyone gets a chance to eat pizzas. I know they're delicious. At a time, there you go. So yeah, and we all know that there's a City Summit coming up next month. So we are in the process of planning a sort of like a recap event. A quick raise of hands if you would like a City Summit recap event sort of a thing conducted next month. Yeah. So sorry guys, I think my microphone's wrong, but thank you for your feedback. Without further ado, I'll be handing over to Daniel. Please, hands together for Daniel.
It's okay. I'll just go with the booming voice. If that's okay.
He's got a loud voice anyway, so he's fine.
Awesome. I'll just go with that. Can everyone hear me? Is this fine, or do I need a mic? All right. Awesome. It's good to see you all. Good to see the smiling faces in the room. My name is Daniel. I am the Chief Innovation Officer at Plerion. Plerion's a cloud security company. I do a bunch of research for Plerion, all this technical research, which I publish on our blog. So everything you'll hear tonight, if you want to review it, probably don't need to take pictures of the slides. You can just go to blog.plerion.com. There's lots of other interesting technical research there, mostly offensive attack style research if you're into that kind of stuff. As it says on the slide, I am a semi-professional Milo enthusiast, so I'll be giving away my personal can of Milo this evening. At the end of the talk, I'll open it up to some questions, and if I hear a really good one, the can of Milo is yours. The last one I had was, have you ever tried pasta with Milo on top as the sauce? That was really good. But yeah, the Milo can is yours if you've got a good question at the end. So, have you guys heard about the one about the security researcher and the AWS policy engine? I'm not sure who I am in this picture, but I know one thing, that when a security researcher, that's me in this case, loves the policy engine very, very much, occasionally a metadata enumeration technique falls out. That's the little guy on the right there, and what we'll be talking about today. Sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it's a happy surprise, but I hope you enjoy it today. So our story starts with a guy named Ben Britz. He's a AWS technologist at a company called CloudEye. And actually, before I loved the AWS policy engine, Ben loved it a lot more before me. But just before I get started on Ben's story, I'm just going to some things up so you understand the rest of the talk. So first of all, I want to give you this premise, that to hack something in AWS, you typically need to know the account ID of the target. And the reason for that is everything in AWS is addressed with an ARN or an Amazon resource name. It's basically like the URL for everything, for each resource. And so like, if you want to find an open queue that you want to read from some confidential data, you've got to know this ARN, and so you've got to know the account ID because the account ID is part of the ARN. So it becomes this critical piece of information that the attacker needs to know. The second premise that I think you all need to know is that IAM policy conditions typically operate on the caller. Now what does that mean? So when you set up a policy to say protect a resource from something, or to give people access, you can provide a condition. So you can say things like, only people from these IP addresses can access this resource. Or only people who are authenticated with multi-factor authentication can access this resource. Or only people from this account can access this resource. But you see the commonality there is the thing we're typically talking about is the person making the call, the person trying to access the resource. It's not a condition about the resource itself. And that's really important. So that's the typical style of policy and policy condition that you set up. And the way this happens is you write your policy, then you attach your policy to your user or to the resource, and then you go and try and access the resource. And everything that we talked about from here on out is kind of using this simple flow. And on the screen you can see, for example, that in the first instance, I try to access a S3 bucket, and it gives me an error because the policy says I can't access it. And then in the second example, I go straight through, and there's no error, which means that I've been successful in accessing the bucket, which means that I've met the condition of the policy. And this is just a simple pattern that everything in AWS uses. And this is the simple pattern that we'll use for the rest of the talk to do the AWS enumeration. Okay, so back to Ben. I told you Ben was going to tell us a story, and this is his story. So Ben found something really cool in 2021. He found a special condition that didn't operate on the caller, but operated on the thing that was being called. And the condition that he used was, you can see down the bottom there, S3 resource account. And what that condition allowed him to do was say, if he could guess that the account an S3 bucket belonged to was 1337, 1337, 1337, if he could guess that correctly, then he could access that bucket. And if he couldn't guess that correctly, then he couldn't access the bucket. So one, he would get an error, and one, he would get no error. Okay, so if Ben was really, really good at guessing 12-digit numbers, he could guess the account ID of a bucket and maybe find out what it is. As you might imagine, guessing 12-digit numbers is pretty hard. There's a lot of combinations to do that. But Ben was very clever. He combined this condition that worked on the resource rather than the caller with this string-like operation. So string-like is basically for some, it's like operation in SQL. It allows you to match pieces of a string instead of the whole string. So in this case, instead of matching the whole 12-digit account ID, Ben could match a piece of it. So he started with the first number, and you could iterate through and say, hey, is it 1, is it 2, is it 3? Oh, 3 matches. Okay, well if 3 matches, now I can go on to the next digit. So he could try 3, 1. All right, that matches. Then he would try 3, 1, 3, and so on. And so in doing that, he reduced the search space from all 12-digit numbers to each individual digit 12 times. So at most, he would have to try 120 combinations, and he would be able to identify the account ID of an S3 bucket, which is pretty cool. If you like to hack accounts, like I said, you need to know the account ID. So this is really helpful for an attacker. Okay, so that's Ben's story. He found this really cool attack in 2021, but this is where sort of my research, our research begins. But it got me thinking, so we could do this for an S3 bucket, and we could do this for an account ID. Was there anything else? What about other services and resource types? So obviously S3 isn't the only service that Amazon provides. There are a variety of services that have globally addressed resources. So one of the reasons why S3 is interesting is that ARN for an S3 bucket is just essentially just the name of the S3 bucket. You don't have to provide the account ID. But there are other resources that have global namespace ARNs in AWS. So could we do those for those resources? Turns out maybe we could. There's this thing called data exchange. How many of you have heard of data exchange on AWS? No? It doesn't seem to be a very popular service. But what you can do with data exchange is buy and sell data sets, research data sets, interesting things that you can work on, things like Common Crawl, which is all the websites effectively that an open source project has crawled. It's a huge data set, and you can download it for yourself. But the way you publish a data set is you get an ID for the data set, which is like, I think, a 20-digit alphanumeric ID. And again, it doesn't have an account ID in it. But you can use this same technique. The only thing that you have to change in that policy is before the action is now the get dataset action. And actually, one of the things you will notice, I said there's only one thing you have to change. But there is one slight change to the string like condition. Can anyone spot it?
Is it 1337?
No, it's no longer using S3. So it's now using the AWS prefix. And this is really important. So Ben found that at the time that he did his research, this condition only applied to S3, so it had an S3 prefix. But between then and now, AWS has added this global condition, which is resource account. So because of this global condition, we can do this on other types of resources. In this case, data exchange get dataset, which is awesome. So if you publish a dataset intending to sell it, you're effectively publishing your account ID as well. Okay, what else? This is probably my favorite, because Lambda function URLs are really cool. So I'm sure all of you know about Lambda functions. They're the serverless compute of AWS. One of the things that they did recently, or fairly recent last few years, is make it really easy to turn a Lambda function into a URL that you can hit in a web browser, for example, and then just run that code. And the URL looks something like URL ID lambda-URL then region.on.aws. Again, inside that URL, there's no account ID, and you're intentionally publishing this URL for someone to use and run the code. Makes it really easy, like running a web server. Turns out, again, you can substitute the action here for lambda invoke function URL, and you can enumerate the account IDs in the exact same way. The only trick here is that it has to be in IAM authentication mode. And the reason for that is it doesn't pass through the policy engine if it's not in authenticated mode. If it's in fully public mode, then it just goes straight through and the policy condition isn't evaluated. But that's pretty cool. Again, you publish your function URL, you're actually publishing your account ID. And this is the last example I will give. We didn't do like an audit of all the services and all the resource types, but I'll give you one last one, and that's API gateway invocation. Kind of functions in the same way. It's got a very similar URL, like a Lambda URL, again, no account ID inside it, but you can do the same. And generally, APIs are more likely to be in IAM authentication mode rather than being fully public APIs. So that's pretty cool. And you just change that action to execute API invoke. For some reason, it's not API gateway, the service in this instance, but the way you invoke API gateway is to use this other service called execute API. Found that interesting. Okay, some of you may have noticed that actually you can generalize this whole thing. So basically, any service and any action that you can basically use this condition engine to find the account ID of that thing. And that becomes really cool because as an attacker, sometimes you also land in an authenticated context where like it's a restricted environment and you want to get more information about something. And maybe it's not just about S3 or data exchange, maybe you want to assume a role or read from a queue or whatever it is. Again, there are hundreds of services and resources you can plug in here. Okay, now the meat. Who here uses resource tags? Does anyone use resource tags? Okay, some of you. What kind of resource tags do you use? Yell out. Yell out some resource tags.
Environment.
Environment? So like prod, dev, staging, yeah, okay, nice. Anyone else?
Application?
Like what an application name?
Yeah.
Alright,
Projects,
nice.
Classification.
Classification, that's a good one.
database cluster,
What's that?
database cluster,
Sorry.
database cluster,
Cluster?
database name.
Nice. Okay, these are great examples. More importantly, what kind of data do you put in your resource tags? I love the classification one, that gets really interesting. Does anyone put anything weird in their resource tags? It's a safe space, you can share.
Like if you look at CloudFormation, it puts in like kind of arbitrary names at first, but it's like the IDs of things. So if you look at them from a human perspective, you're like, what is this tag doing?
Ah. You mean like these ones?
Yeah.
I promise he's not a plant. So one of the interesting things about tags is they're mostly not human made. Like in any environment of any size, there's a lot of automation that creates these tags. In fact, AWS CloudFormation creates these tags automatically on your resources when it makes them. And it'll become, the reason why I'm telling you this will become apparent in just a sec. But there's also these other tags that AWS recommends that you should create. There's like a big guide that says how to do tagging in AWS, which is awesome. It has other things, app name, like we've talked about, owner team email, I don't know, priority, all these kinds of things. But most importantly, if you read the documentation on tags, there's a big red box in the middle of it, and it says, do not put personally identifiable information or other confidential or sensitive information in tags. We use tags to provide you billing and administration services. Tags are not intended to be used for private or sensitive data. This is great. Like, I'm glad they put this in. As you know, I work for a cloud security company and we scan this for customers. And I can assure you that not everyone lives by this advice. No one said anything crazy in this when I asked this time around, but in previous meetups, I've gotten passwords. We have scanned and found API keys of various sorts in tags. People just put all sorts of private and confidential stuff. People put emails in them. Emails are very common. So for example, who do I page if this resource is broken? Who do I talk to if I need to fix a vulnerability in this EC2 instance? All this kind of stuff gets put inside tags all the time. And people find weird and wonderful ways to use resource tags because they're super flexible. It's just a string. We'll just dump some data. That's great. And of course, if the recommended tags and automated tags aren't enough for you, if you wanted to find what else people put in stuff, you can search on GitHub, you can search in other infrastructure as code registries. You'll find great examples of what people, the weird and wonderful stuff people put inside tags. Okay, why am I telling you this? Well, because it turns out there are other conditions that operate on the resource rather than the caller, which are, amongst others, the resource tag condition. So if you know the resource key or the resource tag name that you're trying to read, you can apply this condition to read resource tags of someone else's resources, which is pretty amazing. And again, you can guess password or API key or someone's email or something like that, and you can enumerate. So again, we can generalize this whole thing now. So not only are we generalizing service and action, but we're generalizing the condition here to be something other than resource account. So it could be resource org ID or resource tag, which is cool. So we can read other people's tags, like we've done here. So in this case, if you know that a resource has the tag owner, you can go read it character by character. And the thing that really changes here is that instead of just looking for digits, you give it another alphabet that might be alphanumeric or a dash or a hash or whatever, a dot, whatever else you want in there. So if you were looking for an email address, you need to include an @ sign. The only tricky bit is that it's case sensitive, so you've got to check upper and lowercase. But I know none of you want to do this by hand and create this policy one by one every time, because it's going to be a pain in the butt and it's going to take forever. So if you like, we've created an open source tool that does this whole thing for you. You can give it what alphabet you want to use. You can give it what service and action you want to use, what condition you want to enumerate, all of these kinds of things. You can download it here, it's free, it's open source, and you can go try it today. And this is just an example of how it works. Again, you give it all the parameters, and here you can see it's enumerating the org ID of someone's role that it's assuming. But to finish off, I'll do a demo for you, if I can play it here. Takes a little while. So here I've downloaded Conditional Love. All you need is a Python interpreter. So let's have a look. What am I giving? I'm giving it a profile to use. So this is just my profile that I've set up for running the CLI. I say the action it's going to use is assume role, so it's assuming this role that I've set up. So again, a third party could do this too if they had access to your account. It's reading a resource tag. The tag name is the best drink, and I've given it an alphabet of just uppercase letters. And the interesting thing here is this last action is the role that it's applying to. Because you know how at the very start of the presentation I said, hey, you've got to apply a policy to your own user account? What it's actually doing here is applying a session policy to this specific role that it's assuming, so it can do it faster instead of removing and adding a policy each time to a user. And then it goes ahead and does it and finds out that the tag best drink is Milo. So with that, I think that's the end of the presentation. And I'll open it up to questions. And remember, my personal Milo is on the line, so make it a good question. Anyone?
I guess it's more sort of a statement. There was a lot of stuff about a year ago about AWS account IDs sensitive. There's a lot of stuff bouncing back and forth, and they've obviously improved things. Yeah. Are there at least an entry point, piece of information you need to start with to be able to get started?
Yeah, I mean, it's still, there's really good arguments for both sides, for sure. I think one of the best arguments for it that they're not sensitive is that it's a distraction. Like if you spend your time hiding your account ID, then you're probably not spending your time not making your resources secure, etc. But yeah, I'm definitely on the side of, hey, they're a little bit sensitive because an attacker has to go find these things to go hack something. Yeah.
Can you use this to enumerate more sensitive things like RDS, numbers, once you have an idea?
No, it's just basically the the conditions that are available are the ones that start with AWS resource something, and it's org IDs, org paths, resource tags, and resource accounts. There are actually a few others that are very specific to other services, but those are generally the ones.
Are some resource tags more vulnerable than others? So for example, if you tag all of your CloudFormation resources, which I don't think they're universally available or addressable, are they safer than perhaps other tags that are?
I would say the only factor of whether a tag is safer or not is how guessable is it that you have that tag. So if you name your tag something really random and long, and it's not available in your GitHub repository, no one will guess that tag name, and so they won't be able to perform this attack. But if your tag name is owner or app ID, that's why I showed those lists. Is like those are the very common ones that you can quickly check for.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of like in CloudFormation, if you're using IAC, you might put the committer name. And if that name is their ARN, user ARN, that's obviously a problem.
Yep, correct.
From a detection engineering standpoint, I guess the customers, or generally in public, do people defend against this or detect against this sort of enumeration? Because this usually from like the SOC code is very noisy,
Yep.
and it's always gonna light up like a Christmas tree when someone performs some sort of enumeration.
Yeah, so
I know in terms of prevalence, it's probably very low in the bucket list. It's
yeah.
valuable detection wise, yeah.
Yeah, so people don't detect this kind of thing, and you're right. Like, if you had the choice of writing a detection for, hey, my EC2 instance has got ransomware running versus is someone enumerating the resource tags on my bucket, you'd write the first one. But so like, the other thing is, it's like you kind of need a multifaceted detection, because what you're looking for is like a bunch of errors in a row in a certain time span, etc.
And that leads to the question: is there any lockout policies or too many AWS calls that you can set up?
No, I think the only thing you might hit is API rate limits.
Interesting, yeah.
Great question. I think that's probably the top question so far.
So what is AWS's opinion on this? Do they view it as a security problem? Do they not care? Do they...
So they definitely care, and we definitely shared it with them before we published. I think their opinion is account IDs are not sensitive, so that's irrelevant. Resource tags, I think they're probably a little bit more concerned about, but their guidance has always been that big red box, which is don't put anything sensitive in there. So as long as you do that, then you're okay. The problem with, like I said, is like we've seen how customers put passwords and API keys in there. And it's not everyone, but the problem is, like over and over and over at scale, what AWS has proven is if you make something easy for people, they will just go and do that thing. And they, like, even if 95% of customers read the documentation and adhere to best practices, there'll be the 5% or 1% or 0.25% that don't.
Do you think that they're going to try and do something about it?
No.
Like recognize that something looks like an API key or a password?
Maybe.
Like a big warning as you enter kind of thing?
Potentially. I could see that happening. They're pretty good about that kind of thing. So yeah, I can see that. Certainly, like cloud security tools do that kind of scanning now and will tell you.
So follow up on resource tags. So if I understand correctly, a good defense is to actually, because a lot of the resource tags are automatically generated, as you say. So if you then actually randomize the tag name itself, like instead of putting committer, put committer and a GUID, that's an adequate defense. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it would be. Would I do that? Probably not. It's probably going to cause you more pain in managing all these random tags. But you might choose something like, I don't know, something that's a little bit more cryptic, like underscore committer name, or some. I don't know. I'm just making something up, something that's not like immediately guessable. But honestly, would I protect against this threat? Probably not. The thing I would do if it was me is just check that I'd go through my tags, run some kind of scan that goes, do we put secret stuff in our tags? And if we do, then let's get rid of all that secret stuff instead of trying to protect against this attack. I think we might be getting close to time.
If someone is sniffing your traffic, whatever you do, he will get the information, whatever you're providing it. It doesn't matter.
It's all over SSL, so you shouldn't be able to capture any traffic.
You will be capturing the packets, and then you can do whatever you want to do with those packets.
No, I mean, I don't. I
See,
don't
if you're
so.
going to,
all the API
we'll
traffic,
discuss it offline, okay?
yeah, all the API traffic goes over TLS, so you shouldn't be able to see anything inside that tunnel. But yeah, we can chat about it.
Yeah.
But I'll be here afterwards. Congratulations, injections.
Thank you so much, Dan. Fantastic presentation. We'll just be kicking off in 30 seconds.
Great. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Wonderful. So thank you all for coming along this evening. Quick introduction to myself. I'm Jackson. You may have seen me around. I'm coming up to 6 years working with PolarSeven. Also with the organising of the meetup. So PolarSeven, we're an advanced AWS partner or consulting partner. Our main focus is on migrations, modernizations and managed services. And today we'll be presenting on why you should be using AWS Control Tower. I'll be going through introduction to the Control Tower, architecture and account provisioning, key features and making the transition. And I'll throw it over to Florian, one of our cloud engineers who will be going through a demo this evening. So, to start off, I just wanted to get a show of hands how many people are currently using Control Tower in production setting. Great, and how many people don't really know what Control Tower is or what it's used for? Great, so a bit of a mixed bag, which is good to see. So I wanted to start off with some of the challenges that we're commonly seeing today. So if you're building a well-architected environment, especially at larger scales, you're probably already well along the journey of separating your workloads into dedicated accounts, such as production, dev, UAT, staging, data analytics, and a whole bunch of others. So while there's lots of benefits to adopting this architecture pattern, such as reducing your blast radius for disaster scenarios, clearer cost delineation between the accounts, and ensuring that people only have access to the resources and data that they require, inevitably it leads to teams not knowing what's running in each account, running resources redundantly, which is going to increase your cost, and not knowing who's responsible for what. So whether you're managing 2 to 3 or even hundreds of accounts, we often find that there's a lack of centralized security and compliance process, along with varied access controls, which inevitably increases the risk of something going wrong in at least one of your accounts. Moreover, as you expand and keep creating new accounts, the increasing number requires more time, more effort, and more complexity to manage these. So without the proper tooling for effective oversight, ensuring the efficient operation in the cloud becomes quite a significant challenge for the business and starts costing more and more money. So this is where AWS Control Tower comes into the picture. helping businesses at all scales, streamlining your security and compliance operation. So before diving a little bit more into AWS Control Tower, I first wanted to touch on the nuances between landing zone and the control tower. So essentially, landing zone is the universal concept of creating a multi-environment account architecture and separating those accounts into distinct units per function. Control Tower, on the other hand, is a best practice approach by AWS. You can think about it like a AWS managed landing zone. It streamlines both the setup and then ongoing management for your landing zone with easy to use dashboards, out of the box security policies, and really cuts down the time to manage your organization. So when it comes to setting up Control Tower, you really have a couple of different options. So if you've already got an organization and management account, you can look to deploy that Control Tower in there. But a consideration is that if you've already got service control policies or critical production resources and accounts, you want to make sure that you're not going to impact those existing accounts. The preferred option from our point of view is to create a new management account and deploy the Control Tower there. So this is going to allow you more flexibility, set everything up, and since moving accounts between organizations is a very simple and easy process, we find that this gets the best result. So once you go in and set up the Control Tower in that management account, as you can see, it deploys a log archive and audit account. The log archive for centraling the logs across all of your AWS accounts from a compliance and audit perspective. And the audit account is where we generally set up the centralized security services. This could be something like out-of-the-box security hub from AWS, or it could be a third-party security tool which you might be integrating from the marketplace. From there, it's really up to you how many provisioned accounts that you want to deploy, and some of the considerations there is around what is your team size. Do you have different access requirements depending on what account you're accessing? Is there different compliance requirements for the organization units or the accounts within? Do you need clearer delineation of cost across all of your accounts? Reducing your blast radius, so if something goes wrong in your development or one of the other environments, making sure that that's not impacting other important or critical production accounts, and also the data within. Lastly, what's the management overhead? So if you do split out into lots of different accounts, do you guys have the team and skills required to manage all of that? So once you go about answering those questions, it should be pretty clear what pattern that you're going to take. And a common pattern that we see with a lot of customers is using those three core accounts, such as from the Control Tower, the management, log archive, and audit, and then splitting your workload into dedicated accounts for dev, testing, staging, maybe even multiple production accounts depending on how big your business is, and then optional accounts such as data analytics to host all of your business intelligence, start doing some machine learning, AI processes, and then some other accounts such as shared services, dedicated backup, sandbox, and access. So diving into a little bit of the key features or some of the key features that we see in Control Tower. First up, we have organization units, which, as the name suggests, it's just a logical grouping of your accounts into different business functions. So we can see here a common pattern is to create a core organization unit for your log archive audit, and we generally put things like the backup account in there. You can have very strict control policies there to make sure that people aren't doing actions that they shouldn't. Looking at the top, we can see a dev organization unit or testing organization unit. You might have slightly less strict policies than these to allow for faster moving actions with developers. So looking at security controls, these were previously named guardrails. So if you hear either myself or Florian refer to guardrails, that's what we're really saying. And these come in a couple of different flavors. So mandatory or out of the box, mandatory guardrails that AWS will automatically push across all of your organization units. One example of that might be to block or disallow the deletion of log archive S3 buckets. This is to ensure that essentially your audit information is not going to be lost. Elective also, or strongly recommended guardrails would be another option that you can deploy per organization unit or per account. And this really depends on what your business requirements are around compliance. Each of those examples there, so the first one which I mentioned around disallowing, that's an example of a preventative control which is going to stop you from taking certain actions. And the second being, well, I forgot to give the example, but if you were to say detect whether MFA was enabled across IAM users, that would be an example of a detective control. So moving a little faster so we can get to the demo, the fun stuff. Account Factory, that's used to create accounts very easily and simply. You'll have security and logging pre-configured. You can put them into a organization unit so those security policies are enabled from the get-go. You do also have the option to deploy accounts now through the CLI, which is something that Florian will be taking us through shortly. And the activities page, pretty basic, it just shows all of the AWS Control Tower actions which you've initiated from the management account. So one of the things that at PolarSeven we love most about the Control Tower is the ease of setup. So to get going can really be done within a day. So to break it down into 4 simple steps, you need to establish the Control Tower in your management account, set up the organization units and security policies that you want to enforce across the organization, set up your access, which it's generally recommended to integrate with a single sign-on solution, and then migrate with care, which is really just enrolling your existing accounts into the new Control Tower, if that's the approach you've decided to take. So the biggest consideration that you want to be careful of is coming to step 4, if you are moving production or non-production resources and accounts into the Control Tower, you want to make sure that the mandatory and elective guardrails or security controls we've mentioned previously are not going to nefariously impact your resources and break things. Great, so that's all from me. I'll throw it over to Florian for the demo.
Thanks a lot. So I'm going to take you through the Control Tower build and how to deploy a new account inside a new organizational unit. And in addition to that, Jackson already mentioned some of the strongly recommended guardrails and also some of the service control policies that we want to set up. And I show you how this can be done with infrastructure as code. So the first thing is kind of, what do we want to achieve? So I want you at the end of the presentation to understand how you do a basic deployment of the Control Tower with organizational units, how to manage accounts, and then also understand how to manage them. This can be both in IC or even simpler with the AWS console. And as the last step, we then gonna look at the service control policies itself and see how to prevent or also break stuff. So the account structure is quite simple that we're going to use. We already have an AWS organization. I will be mostly using the master account to deploy the services around there. From there, I have access to the different member accounts and the organizational units. You can see that the member accounts inherit from the organizational unit if set up correctly, and I can even have a sub-organizational unit. Since we are going to have a student project very soon with VIT, I was thinking of, hey, let's just take a non-prod organizational unit in our sandbox environment, give it another unit, and set it up in a way so they cannot leak sensitive data and also try to keep costs low. So this is one of the considerations I have myself, and for that I'm going to show you the base setup in infrastructure as code first, and then gonna add some things onto it. So everything you see in this overview here is already deployed. So this is the core environment. So we're using Scepter for it. It's basically an open source tool to manage CloudFormation stacks in a parameterized session. And this core account is governing everything that's deployed on master. So in this case, organizational settings, some IAM stuff, and also the control tower controls. The things in yellow have already been pre-deployed just for time sensitivity. And everything that's in demo, except for the demo bucket itself, have also will be deployed along the way. And next, I'm just gonna dive into the organization build that I want to deploy. So this is our new account. It's a little bit small for you to see. So we're essentially just pointing for both the account and the organizational unit to a simple template. I'm just gonna quickly show it. So this organizational unit is a basic CloudFormation resource, and the same here. So this is OU, a parent OU, and a child OU, and for the account, as mentioned, some configurations around the naming and also which OU is governed. What I want to deploy in addition to it are the service control policies. So we have already touched quickly on metadata, such as tags. One of the most recommended settings is that your EC2 instance is using HTTPS for the metadata service. This can be done with such a policy. So we basically deny that you deploy the unencrypted version. And for S3 buckets, a common pattern is to always have versioning on. So if someone deletes something, we make sure, okay, there's still another version enabled, and the IAM permissions are set up in a way so you cannot delete those versions. And secondly, that once we have private access established for the 3 buckets, we don't just change it to public. And for the secret, pretty similar, give it a tag. So we already spoke about certain tags that we want to have. What we have seen with a lot of customers is like, they deploy so many secrets, and in the beginning it doesn't really matter. But one secret costs like $1 a month, and that aggregates quickly. So for people with 100 secrets, it's easily $1,000 a year, and it's pretty hard to clean them up. And that's also one of the reasons I like service control policies. I just prevents people from doing stupid stuff, and it's not me going after them and cleaning up, because it takes a lot more time and also costs other companies a lot more money when we get to resolve those issues. You see AI here, that's pretty much a bait. So I'm actually preventing AI from collecting data for AWS. You also know that AWS, or like for every user service you have, you usually give an explicit agreement that you wanted to collect data. Of course you don't want to, but in AWS you can say, hey, I'm gonna opt out of data collection for like development purposes of their services. So that's what I would recommend in the beginning. Keep in mind that all those different policy types that you want to deploy, so it's this command, have to be enabled first. So they make it a little bit harder to see, but once you have enabled the different policy types, there's 4, tagging, backup, service control policies, and AI opt-out, then you can deploy all those policies. All right, enough ISE, and now I'm just gonna check if I'm actually logged into my accounts. So we're gonna use single sign-on. I'm gonna check if there's any S3 bucket or something available, so I'm still logged in. I am. And we said we want to launch the whole organization, right? So the account, the subunit, and the SCPs and AI policies connected to it. So everything I'm just typing right here means, okay, I'm going to the config directory, and then I'm going to launch the core setup in master. It's already pre-typed, luckily. And this will give me the version to deploy. I can also do similar as in Terraform, diff first, so basically before the apply plan, so I see all the resources. In this case, I'm just going to trust it and deploy the different stacks. And the best way to see it is to be inside CloudFormation itself and then see the deployment of the individual resources. So we can see Enforce tag has already been deployed. The other ones are also in place. So 3 service control policies and 1 to prevent the AI usage. All right, now a question to you. I have all these policies in place now. where do you think, do I see them? You can just think about it yourself, why I have to reload the tabs, because after 1 hour you usually get logged out. So for the control policies itself, we can just check our organizational unit, and we're going to see we have 2 OUs here. This is the one we have already registered. This is the one that was prepared beforehand, and this is the new one that's already there. And in order to enroll it, I would need to follow the AWS console and go through the necessary steps here. We are not going to do this because, as you can see, it takes around 2 hours just to enroll it into the control tower. What's more interesting though is the organizational unit that is already enrolled. So this is the EvilCorp V1 version. You can see the demo count associated to it and our enabled control. So 15 of it are the mandatory ones, and one of them was pre-deployed by me in an elective policy, and this is going to touch on compliance again. So we want to know if all the buckets that we deploy have versioning enabled, and by just going to the account itself, we can see, well, versioning for at least one resource is not enabled, so the account itself is non-compliant. So this is usually important for bigger organizations, but for me, it doesn't really help. Like, when things are just shown as we have seen before, with a warning, don't do this, don't do that, unless I explicitly stop them from doing it, people still go for it. Because warnings, especially if they're yellow, don't have the same effect. So next step, I'm going to just deploy the policies that I have quickly touched on before. So the AI ones and basically all the service control policies, and see if the deployment of our resources in the demo account will run through successfully. And this is the question where I want you to lift up your hand with the amount of fingers of the stacks do you think that will deploy successfully. So for the secrets, we have 1 with tags and 1 without tags. And for the S3 buckets, we have 1 public bucket with tags, then a bucket just with tags, and then also a bucket without tags. So the service control policies where we want to prevent public access, we want to have the classification tag, and for secret manager it was have the tag classification enabled. Quickly let you think about it, like 1 more second. So again, it's the public bucket. You can see that public access blocked for this one. It's actually set to false. My git commit was maybe a bit too hectic. And for the other ones, they are set to true as expected, and we have the tags according to the demo. So now, raise your hand for how many deployments we'll go through. A lot of hesitance, but I saw some 2s in there. So let's just launch it and see which resources are going to deploy. For that, I can actually not use the management account. What I can see while deploying in the background is, again, all the policies and organizational units here. So when I go to policies, I see, oh, my opt AI policy has successfully been enabled, and also my tech policies and my IAM, like the metadata service policy, are successfully deployed. But to verify that the deployments go through, we can either use the CLI, which will be very confusing because of course certain stacks fail, and I don't want you to be in pain by looking at it. So I'm just going to CloudFormation. And interestingly, just 1 stack succeeds with the deployment. And the reason for it is where you can have service control policies enabled, but every resource handles the creation differently. So whereas a S3 bucket gets created first and then the tags are applied in hindsight, at least when you use CloudFormation for deployments, the secrets in Secret Manager do pass the configuration directly on default, so the service control policies can actually work. So what do we do about it? So going to S3, we will see we only have one of the buckets deployed, but we wanted to have at least 3 of them deployed, right? So the way to do it is to go back to our policy and modify it. So we have realized tagging doesn't work. So we're gonna just take it out. And for deny public access, deny public bucket, it only works, we want to only have it applied to the buckets that are already applied. So what we can do here is to use a stack output, so a cross-reference to the existing stack that exists, and then look at the other S3 buckets in hindsight. So this might not sound optimal, but this is the way to go for all your existing S3 buckets that you have governed to put those service control policies in place, unless you use more complicated options and also security solutions such as Plerion to then make sure you have this kind of governance and also more elaborated controls with lambda functions and so on in place. So what I would do here now is to create a cross-reference. I know that it's a resource, so I need the bucket ARN, which will also use the account number that we have heard before. I can now just relaunch specifically this SCP, so we know it's the S3 enforce tag private work. Have I forgot something? I don't think so. So this is gonna redeploy our service control policy. And once this is done, I should not be able for the one existing S3 bucket that is there to make it public again. So let's see when it's done. Okay, the update is supposed to be complete. Previously, it was not specifically governed, so let's try to save the changes. Again, a nice little chat box in yellow that people usually ignore. So just gonna confirm this, but we will see I still don't have access to do that. And I don't really want to wait for this policy to finish. It will do it in the background. It's an asynchronous command. So I'm just gonna use our demo build and try to relaunch everything. And how many stacks will now be successfully launched after having adjusted the policy? It was 5 in the beginning. I see 4. 4 as well. That's 3. 3. Create is still in progress, but there's usually one trick we can do. We can just go into the S3 interface, and we will see all S3 buckets now get created, and the only resource that fails is our secret that is intact. So usually we would check in events here, we see the create is complete. It just takes CloudFormation a little bit since we're in the evening today to deploy it. And this brings me to the summary of today's talk. So let's go into preview. So we have seen this, we have gone through the different deployments, how to change it. I didn't go that much into how to actually use SSO to get those outputs and so on. That was simplified. But the main thing I want to focus on are the individual learnings. So while IAC is pretty much usable for Control Tower, it's still not optimal because you need to know a lot about the individual services. You need to make sure that everything is governed in hindsight unless you have an automation built on top of it. And even with the advantage of putting it in IC and cross-referencing it, it may still not be the better solution in the account factory that can, for instance, give you VPC and so on out of the box. But at least everything you do will be in IEC, and I will be now able to simply pass in my nuke script. There's a nice AWS open source nuke solution that you can put into accounts to always destroy the account after a certain time. Again, for cost savings, and then also make sure that at least the time frame where configurations are done wrong is minimal. And lastly, I would recommend a combination for Control Tower guardrails and the organizational policies, so you can make sure to have the best of elective, mandatory rules, and then also both preventing at launch and then the governing rules. Alright, that's it, and if you have any questions regarding Control Tower, feel free to ask either Jackson or me. Yes?
Is that piece around the sort of resource output reference the most tedious part of migrating an existing organisation to Control Tower?
Yes and no. So the references have to be set like once, and once you have this template, you can easily use basically the same infrastructure as code framework and then just adjust it in the config. So when we look a little bit closer here, I didn't touch on it too much in detail, but what I only need to do is to have the account number of the master account. Pay attention now because you can apparently do a lot of stuff with it. And then also, if we go even one config higher up, see the organizational unit IDs, and all those information are then passed on in a generic way. So you can replicate a lot by hand. Where it gets tedious is the actual service control policies, because this is like my one organizational unit. If I want to add one, I can either just put like the OU like this in there, or create another reference. It's still easier than doing it manually, because once you surpass a certain number of accounts, maximum is 300, then it's gonna be tedious. And also, when the students just say like, oh no, I'm not gonna work on it anymore, I don't even need my nuke, then I can just do my scepter delete and it's game over.
Is there a maximum number of accounts that can be managed?
So for Control Tower, the default number is 300.
But I can go more than that.
Yeah, so it's with everything with AWS limits. There's some hard limits that you cannot increase, but for accounts, there's an option where you can hand in a service request in AWS, or quota increase request, and then increase it to, I don't know, probably 1,000 or something. There's also hard limit there, but yeah. All right, then back to you, Annie.
Fantastic presentation. Thanks, Jackson, Florian, and Daniel. Amazing stuff. Just quickly, like I said, we've got this summit coming up, and we are in the process of planning the event for next month. So it's just like, sort of like a event recap stuff. So we'll get back to you on that one. And also, do not forget, you might find this piece of paper on your table over there. So just please scan it for a chance to actually win a massage gun. It's a pretty useful thing. And do not forget that you've got some tote bags as well. It's again a useful thing as well. But please come up with your questions to PolarSeven and Daniel as well. They'd love to. And I hope you guys enjoy those delicious pizzas. And we look forward to seeing you next one. Cheers.
Yeah, for sure. And again, for those, it's really SCP is like it's a kind of for non-code accounts, you see it's pretty hard, like because I don't want to have the student prevent anything, and then building this custom lambda kind of shows like it's still a payable audit or government orders AWS accounts.
You built the work for
That's what we have to do.
Nice. Job, man.
Nice.
Very specific.
Yeah, the questions that are going to come to you.
Organizing
Thank you
and
so much. I hope you know your expectations, but just at least I don't know if I went though, but if you've got like, I hope you got good questions.
Das ist immer diese,
Yeah.
das erkennst du, das halt in der einen auf der anderen Seite beispielsweise.
So we yeah, oh no, definitely. Interesting presentation and stuff. Yeah.
yeah.
Pretty nice select flavors that is good. Go for that. Hey,
I will ask someone.
Yeah.
Richard, how are we going to do the?
How do you want to do that?
I was asking Cynthia about that. So she got the data.
Oh, right.
Let's go chat to Cynthia.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. And yeah, if you want, like, you can grab a mic and just announce it outside.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, okay, cool. Hey, I'm good, man. How are you?
Good, very good.
Thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
Yo, it's all good. Like, if